When having a blood test during the prenatal checkup, the young nurse pricked me 6 times but still couldn't draw blood. I was dizzy because I hadn't had breakfast, and I said softly, "Sister, how about getting someone else to do it?" Unexpectedly, the young nurse started cursing loudly, attracting a crowd of onlookers. Just as I opened my mouth, Louis walked up with a cold expression and accused me. "Can't you stop acting like a shrew?" As he pulled me away, listening to the people around pointing and whispering about me, I suddenly felt that these 5 years of marriage were meaningless. "Big sister, your blood vessels are really hard to find," the young nurse complained when she failed to draw blood on the 5th attempt. I couldn't help but let out a hiss. It was already very uncomfortable not to eat or drink, and I had just stood in line for 40 minutes with my big belly. Now I was extremely dizzy, and my husband, Louis, still hadn't come over even though it had been almost an hour since he went to park the car. I looked at the increasingly impatient young nurse in front of me as she inserted the needle into my arm for the 6th time. Looking at the empty syringe, she whispered, "Damn it." She suddenly wiped my arm vigorously, as if venting her dissatisfaction. I gently withdrew my arm and said softly, "Sister, how about getting someone else to do it?" Unexpectedly, the young nurse flew into a rage immediately. She violently tore off the tourniquet. "Big sister, you're as swollen as a pig, and you still blame me for not being able to find your blood vessels." She stood up and said, "Looking at you like this, even if you have a baby, it won't be anything good." More offensive words poured out like a tide. Listening to these foul words, my face turned red and then pale, seeing more and more people gathering to watch. After calming down my emotions, I said, "You look quite pretty, but why do you have such a foul mouth? Moreover, what's all the commotion about?" Louis frowned and walked closer. He was wearing a well-fitted custom-made suit, exuding a cold and aloof aura. As soon as he approached, the crowd automatically made way for him. I immediately felt wronged. I stretched out my hand and said with a sobbing voice, "Louis and I fell in love in college. After graduating, we were in a long-distance relationship for a year, with mutual support day and night. We both made efforts to be together and established stable careers. The following year, we held a wedding. Everyone said that we were a perfect couple, like the hero and heroine in a fairy tale." And at this moment, Louis slowly approached. He had a cold expression on his face and glanced at my arm full of needle marks. "Enough. Aren't you ashamed enough already?" I pointed at the young nurse and burst into tears immediately. "Didn't you hear how foul-mouthed she was? She even cursed our baby." "Enough," Louis said sharply. "Can't you stop acting like a shrew?" With that, he grabbed my wrist and led me away from the scene. Louis took big steps, and I had to run to keep up with him. Looking at Louis's broad back and listening to the people around pointing at me, I suddenly felt that these 5 years of marriage were meaningless. "Louis," I used all my strength to shake off his hand. "You said you would stand by my side unconditionally, and it's clearly her fault." Louis irritably tore at his tie. "She obviously looks like an intern. Why are you arguing with her? Just don't ask for her next time." "Okay." He frowned and got into the car directly. "Such a trivial matter. I don't know what there is to argue about, and you don't even feel ashamed." I let out a long sigh. "First of all, it's her fault. I talked to her nicely, but she started cursing. I was just giving a proper response. Secondly, Louis, you're my husband and should stand by my side instead of thinking I'm embarrassing." By the end, I was almost shouting, "All right, get in the car quickly." Louis opened his mouth and finally softened his tone. After I took my seat, I immediately filed a complaint against the young nurse at the No. 3 blood drawing window. I casually opened my WeChat moments. Maggie, an intern in the company, posted, "The mutterings of the cold boss are somehow really cute. Who understands?" The accompanying picture was Maggie complaining about how difficult and tiring the adult world was, and Louis was comforting her word by word. The chat records filled the screen. The time was the 40 minutes when I was standing in the long line. Because of the emotional turmoil, I felt a dull pain in my lower abdomen. "Louis," after saving the screenshot, I said calmly, "Buy some food. I'm really hungry." I remembered those 40 minutes. I carried my almost full-term belly and my swollen body, feeling so awkward as I made my way through the crowd. At that time, Louis was sitting in the car in a suit, chatting merrily with the young and beautiful girls in the company. The chat even included words like, "little fool," and "silly girl." Once, Louis used to hold me dear. Now, it must just be the plain period of our marriage. The baby keeps kicking me. I touched my belly and tilted my head to look at Louis. Louis didn't give me a single glance and looked straight ahead coldly. It's not easy to park here. Looking at the bustling morning market outside the car, I remembered that when I was 20 years old, just because I casually said, "I'm hungry," while watching a food live stream, he immediately crossed half of the city in the rainy night and stood outside the door with that steaming signature stir-fried chicken. The young man in white back then was green and said, "As long as you say you want something, even if it's the moon in the sky, I'll find a way to pick it for you." My smile froze. "Stop the car." I unbuckled my seatbelt. "I want to eat." It's not that I'm being difficult. As a pregnant woman in the 37th week, I'm really uncomfortable. Moreover, I also have a bit of hypoglycemia. Hearing this, Louis's face darkened a bit more. I also didn't say anything more. I put my phone in my bag and got out of the car. I suddenly remembered that I was too impulsive just now and didn't ask the doctor when to do the next examination. So I started rummaging through my prenatal checkup files. In these few seconds, because Louis parked the car temporarily and the car behind wanted to turn right, it honked the horn twice. I just waved my hand and signaled, "I'll leave right away." The moment I closed the car door, Louis said dissatisfiedly, "Why are you being so delicate? What's the big deal if you don't eat one meal?" I thought I had misheard and was about to ask again. Louis stepped on the gas pedal to the floor out of pique and disappeared in an instant. I stood on the side of the road, feeling a bit at a loss. Was it my fault? "Hello, would you like to take a seat?" A man carrying a lady's bag placed a folding chair at my feet. "You don't look well. Take a rest." I looked at the pregnant woman behind the man. She seemed to be about the same month as me. Her husband carried a folding chair with him, and there were hot water, snacks, and a prenatal checkup bag hanging on him. "Miss, are you having hypoglycemia?" The pregnant woman said. "Eating a piece of candy will make you feel better." Looking at the piece of candy she handed me, I suddenly felt extremely wronged. Standing in the August sun, I burst into tears like a child. Looking at my swollen figure reflected in the mirror, I remembered the once high-spirited and bright girl. I took out my phone and looked at the empty message list. It felt like there was a hole in my heart. So, I went to a hotel, opened a room, and prepared to have a good rest. But as soon as I lay on the bed, I couldn't help but keep opening WeChat and refreshing the list over and over again. Louis's profile picture lay there motionless. If I don't go home, won't he be worried and ask about it? No, I should make him worry. Who asked him to always have a stinky face recently? In the past, every time I went out, Louis was always worried. He always treated me like a child and would only feel at ease when he tied a balloon to my wrist. Thinking of this, I turned my phone to silent mode. I drew the thick curtains and prepared to have a good sleep. But I couldn't help thinking of that screenshot. After tossing and turning for a long time, it finally dawned. I had already planned in my mind how to face Louis's anxious inquiries. The moment my phone screen lit up, my mind went blank. There wasn't a single call or message. I felt an inexplicable sense of panic. Could something have happened to Louis? Half an hour later, when I got home, Louis was on the phone in the study. His voice was gentle as he said softly, "Don't worry. I didn't expect this to happen either. Don't cry." Finally, he smiled and said, "You want me to bark like a dog to make you happy. If you don't come to work with big dark circles under your eyes tomorrow, I'll perform it for you." I stood barefoot outside the study, looking at the wedding photo hanging in the living room. In the photo, Louis looked at me with an undisguised look of doting in his eyes. Now, everything has changed. While I was in a daze, Louis opened the door of the study and came out. "You're up." He seemed to be taken aback. Seeing that I didn't react, his expression became serious again. "Let's talk." The gentle and soft-spoken him just now seemed like a completely different person at this moment. And judging from his words, he didn't know that I hadn't come home all night. What on earth could it be that made him sit in the study all night? I obediently sat opposite Louis and poured myself a glass of milk. "Naomi, why have you become so mean now?" My hand holding the cup trembled. "What? Everyone was young once. Why sentence someone to death for a small thing? Why did you file a complaint against that young nurse as soon as you left? Do you know that you might prevent her from graduating?" I replied. "The hospital has already explained to me. She's a young girl from a health school who hasn't graduated yet. She started cursing yesterday because some of her friends were there. and she wanted to show off how tough she was. Lewis said coldly. So, you want to ruin her future? I said word by word. So, she should pay for her arrogance. I shouldn't be a tool for her to show off. I didn't even hold the hospital accountable. Molly is just a bit willful. She's young, so it's inevitable that she makes mistakes. Didn't you make mistakes when you were young? Lewis interrupted me. Molly, I asked, suddenly remembering something. I asked eagerly, what's her last name? Lewis then realized that he had said too much. After clearing his throat, he said, she's the younger sister of an assistant in our company. It was like raindrops gathering and finally forming a small river. Everything had an answer. I threw my phone on the table. So, you're planning to make me suffer the grievance in vain and even make me apologize to her. Right. Lewis picked up the phone and looked at the screenshot. I said furiously, oh, no. Your current demand is not that simple. You're now hoping that I had never appeared, and you'd rather be single. Then you can be with your Maggie happily ever after. Lewis stood up abruptly. Shut up. He rubbed his temples and said impatiently, the innocent will prove their innocence. I don't want to argue with you. I was on the verge of a breakdown. Lewis, explain it to me clearly. What's the relationship between you and Maggie? Are you willing to let your full-term wife queue up by herself but can't bear to see her being a bit sad? Can you stand by a total stranger? That young nurse. When a conflict arises, but you can't tolerate your own wife, do you still have me in your heart? At this moment, I just hoped that Lewis could explain it clearly. It was like there was a sword of Damocles hanging above my head. I didn't know when it would fall, and I could only feel anxious. But Lewis didn't want to explain. After letting out a long sigh, he put on his coat. Calm down by yourself. He tied his tie neatly. His suit was well-fitted and he was meticulous. When Lewis closed the door and looked at me, he said in a condescending tone, look at yourself. What's the difference between you and a madman? With a bang, the door closed. I stood there in a daze. I lit a fire as a signal. But he didn't respond. I shouted loudly, but he closed the city gate. I suddenly felt very lonely, just like the whale named Alice in the sea. The sounds it made were never heard by its kind. I realized that we hadn't had a good chat for a long time. In the past, he would listen carefully to my ramblings and follow my emotional ups and downs. Later, he became quieter and quieter. It made me seem more and more noisy and talkative. He was indifferent. So I fell into a vicious cycle of being sensitive and irritable. I slumped onto the sofa, gasping for breath. The only sound I could hear in the air was my own breathing. I suddenly realized that the baby hadn't moved for a long time. I broke out in a cold sweat and didn't dare to stay still for a moment. I dialed the phone with trembling hands. Lewis, I need to go to the hospital. The baby hasn't. Lewis suppressed his voice. I'm busy. But I heard a delicate and charming female voice. Thank you. Boss, are you sure you can do it? Does it really take this long to fix a water pipe? I said in a firm tone. The baby is in danger. You come back immediately. Ah, my clothes are all wet. Hurry up. A scream sounded. Lewis didn't hesitate anymore. Don't threaten me with the child at every turn. Not everyone has as much free time as you. I listened to the busy tone on the phone. I remembered the year I wanted to develop my career in broadcasting. It happened that Lewis's studio was established, and he said he couldn't do without me. After much hesitation, I decided to stay by Lewis's side. After things stabilized, he begged me to stay at home and be his strongest support. Hello, is this hospital? I felt a warm current gush out between my legs and immediately lay down and called an ambulance. The accompanying doctor asked seriously, why didn't you have the scheduled major examination? Your amniotic fluid has broken. And the fetal heart rate is not good. Where is your family member? At this stage of pregnancy, how could you be left at home alone? Looking at the doctor's furrowed brows, my consciousness was getting more and more blurred. The doctor took out my phone and called the emergency contact. Hello, is this Mrs. Naomi's husband? Your wife is in great danger now. Please come to the hospital immediately. The fetal heart rate has dropped to 50. The pregnant woman has moderate anemia. Why is there no file? I lay on the cold bed, being pushed around. No one could see me, with tears streaming down my face under the oxygen mask. When I decided to come here with Lewis for development, I gave up everything in my hometown. He once solemnly told my parents that he would treat me well for a lifetime. I don't know when it started, but we had different thoughts even while sharing the same bed. and we had nothing to say to each other anymore. Has the family member arrived? The pregnant woman's amniotic fluid has broken, and the fetal heart rate has dropped. She no longer meets the conditions for a natural delivery and needs to sign the consent form. In the hazy mist, I looked around. So many people were gathered around, all trying to save me and the baby. But my closest husband was not by my side. Lewis's company was only a 10-minute drive from the hospital. He wasn't in the company. I gently raised my hand. I'll sign it myself. I took a deep breath. I'm fully conscious now and can sign. Tears slid down my cheeks, and my voice was a bit hoarse. If there are any unexpected situations during the operation, save me. I signed my name under the doctor's compassionate gaze and said solemnly, "Thank you all for your hard work." I closed my eyes. Like a lamb, I arched my body and let the anesthesiologist insert the long needle into my lower back. "Baby, you have to be strong." My lower body gradually lost its sensation. I stared blankly at the lights in front of me. I remembered the year when I was 21, when I got the HPV vaccine. Lewis, seeing the thin needle piercing my arm, held me in his arms lovingly. His eyes turned red. On our wedding day, he carried me and ran all the way. He was like a victorious warrior. "Don't say you still love me, because I've seen what it looks like when you loved me." The moment the baby cried, my heart suddenly felt extremely clear. Finally, I fainted. I don't know how long I slept. "Wife, you're awake." Lewis sat by the bedside, looking pale. "Where's the baby?" I immediately became alert. "There's nothing serious. The baby just needs to stay in the incubator for a few days." I let out a long sigh of relief. Lewis hesitated. "I'm sorry. I didn't know." Seeing that I didn't ask further, he took my hand. "I was busy at that time. I really didn't expect anything to happen to you. I was so scared when I received the call." I looked at him. "You were with Maggie." Lewis looked flustered. "It was just an accident. She lives alone." Seeing me looking at him with a cold smile and not making a scene, Lewis changed the subject, as if trying to take credit. "Molly often caused trouble in the health school. She was forced by her family to do the internship. That day, while the teacher was out, she showed off her power and targeted you. The hospital gave her a major demerit and sent her back to the health school. She has already been expelled." He stared at me intently. It seemed that he was waiting for me to coquettishly praise him as I used to, but I could only give a faint Lewis busied himself around me, and he seemed to have returned to the dedicated man he used to be. The day after I removed the urinary catheter and got out of bed to walk, Maggie came. She was wearing a simple white t-shirt and had a fresh and neat ballerina bun. Her appearance wasn't as stunning as I had imagined. "Naomi." She smiled and placed the fruit basket on the table. "Congratulations on having a baby boy." At that time, I was lying on the maternity pad, with my hair in a mess. My body was flabby and swollen. I glanced at the information about the maternity matron that Lewis had just sent and didn't mention Maggie at all. It seemed that Lewis didn't know Maggie would come. I got straight to the point. "Just say what you want to say." Maggie didn't dodge either. She directly handed me her phone. She flipped through the screen and stopped at a certain page. "I've answered all your anxieties and doubts about entering society. In return, you can be my emotional trash can too." My wife really talks a lot. She tells me everything, like who's having their third child, who got married and divorced again. I'm already very tired from work, and I still have to listen to her ramblings. So tiring. My wife is having morning sickness and can't stand the smell of cooking oil, so she asked me to cook. I asked my mom to come, but she disliked my mom for having a personality of enduring hardships without real suffering and refused. Naomi is so unreasonable. Just because I didn't pour her water while I was playing games, she cried and scolded me. Is being pregnant really that delicate? I've said it 7 or 8 times that I'll pour the water. She had a big fight with me at night because I forgot to pick her up from the hospital when it was raining. In the end, she turned her back to me and kept crying. I know she's waiting for me to coax her, but I'm also tired. I'll sleep and bring her breakfast tomorrow, and that'll be it. I'm home, but I don't want to go upstairs. She has a sore waist and arms now and asks me to give her massages every day. When I say I'm tired, she gives me the silent treatment. Is the progesterone really that strong? I feel like this woman is like a madman. I'm home, and I'm in the car. It's raining. It's a good time for a cup of hot coffee, you say. Right. Assistant Xia. Later. The words, my wife, Naomi, and that woman, gradually disappeared. Only the daily conversations between him and Maggie were left. They were so close that they would ask each other what tie to match with the clothes they were wearing that day. When he was pursuing me, he was even more enthusiastic than when he was with you, she said. I replied. He bribed every one of my friends, got my class schedule, and revolved around me every day. When we were in a long-distance relationship, just because I said I missed him, he secretly took a hard seat for 9 hours to come and see me, without exception. But he doesn't love you anymore. Maggie was angry and her face turned red when she didn't expect my calm reaction. I smiled. But I'm his wife. I provocatively threw the phone back to her. And you're just an assistant. The chat records couldn't be used as evidence. I covered my surgical wound and gently turned around. Maggie stood in front of my hospital bed for a long time. She stood there so long that I was almost asleep. Lewis had already met Molly at my place. My body trembled. Maggie raised her voice. Molly didn't want to study in the health school in the first place. Now, thanks to Lewis, he arranged for her to join the company. Thank you, Naomi. When Lewis came back, he brought a maternity matron in her 40s, Emily. I didn't mention that Maggie had come. I just let Emily give me a massage and tell me the precautions for the confinement period. Seeing that I wasn't as talkative as before, Lewis always told me about things in the company. I'm tired, Lewis. I closed my eyes, cutting off Lewis's words that were still on his lips. I remembered countless days and nights in the past when I cried under the covers. I knew he wouldn't come to coax me, so I turned on my phone, watched a super funny variety show on mute. When I was too tired to keep my eyes open, I fell asleep. The next morning, he would put the hot breakfast on the table. I would get up and fasten his tie for him. It was as if nothing had happened. Only I knew how painful I was on those tossing and turning nights. On the day I was discharged from the hospital, Lewis carried me from the wheelchair to the car. He didn't let me walk a single step. After you're settled in the confinement center, I'll go and get the baby's birth certificate. I adjusted the seat of the nanny car and lay semi-reclined. Lewis showed me. The son is doing well. He has already grown to 5 pounds and 2 ounces. He smiled. He can be discharged from the hospital after taking a bath tomorrow morning. I asked, have you chosen a name for the baby? Lewis seemed to be recalling the good old days, with a smile in his eyes. Don't you remember, when we were 20 years old, we fantasized that if it was a girl, we would name her Siemui, and if it was a boy, I couldn't listen anymore and sat up. Lewis, the baby won't have the surname of you. After a moment of panic, Lewis said, that's right, you've been through a lot. Coming back from the brink of death, it's better for the baby to have your surname, since you married far away from home. Having the surname yours can also comfort your parents. Let's get a divorce, I said. Lewis looked at Emily, then at the others in the car, and said in a low voice, do you know what you're saying? I didn't argue anymore. I took a new screenshot of Maggie's WeChat moments and sent it to him, comparing it with my pregnancy records. While he was having a late-night cup of hot coffee with Maggie, I was vomiting my guts out over the toilet. While he was taking Maggie to watch the romantic fireworks, I was restless because of the pain in my pubic bone. While he was patiently consoling Maggie, I was crying my eyes out under the quilt because of our quarrel. Naomi, there's a limit to joking around. Lewis was a bit angry. I chuckled. Do I look like I'm joking? I'll leave so you can find someone to replace me. I whispered in his ear. Or do you want your Maggie to be a mistress that everyone will curse? Lewis's face turned red instantly. I was afraid that sitting for a long time would cause problems with my waist, so I ignored him and turned around to lie down. Wife, after settling things down, Lewis finally grabbed me. I understand you. I wasn't by your side during such a big thing as giving birth. I know I was wrong, he explained, but I swear to God that I've never done anything to betray you. I just thought Maggie looked a lot like you when you were young, so I took a little more care of her. I only see her as a younger sister. Our relationship is very pure. Not what you think. I looked at him and said calmly, I haven't felt happy by your side for a long time. I'm not chosen, not favored. In your eyes, I'm a shrew, a madman. I'm talkative, noisy, irritable. I'm the one you don't cherish in your heart. I paused, to give him enough time to remember those past events. Finally, I said firmly, let's get a divorce. After a long while, Lewis deleted those photos and said in an irritated tone, just because of these trivial things, we're not in a passionate relationship anymore. We've been married for 5 years. Isn't this what marriage is like? I've already said I'm sorry. What else do you want? After the baby came back, Emily took care of him. I was taken care of by the people at the confinement center. The days were going quite well. When people have no expectations, they won't be disappointed. I felt much lighter in mood. Naomi, are you about to give birth soon? One day, my mom called, her voice gentle. Mom calculated that there are still 10 days until the due date. I'll come to take care of you in the next couple of days. I didn't want to worry them, who were far away, because the journey here was too long. I thought I'd tell them when they arrived. Okay, Mom, I replied, pretending to be relaxed. Suddenly, a sharp voice came from the other end of the phone. Naomi, you've really grown up and become stubborn. You even hid such a big thing as giving birth from us. I felt uneasy. Mom, Louis has already told us. Just because Louis chatted with his assistant, you're threatening to get a divorce. You're being so willful. My dad also sighed beside her. Louis is an honest man. He takes care of the family and treats you extremely well. He doesn't even lose his temper. Who else can tolerate your bad temper except him? My calm heart was stirred up. They had no idea how hurtful the cold violence used by such a good man could be. I had already been worn down and was no longer the same as before in such days. Mom, marriage is for happiness, right? I'm not happy. I'm with him day and night, but I only feel lonely. I sobbed. In this marriage, I've changed from a young girl to a shrew, to a madman. I don't want to become a mute. I want to save myself. I choked up as I finished speaking. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. It was so long that I thought the call had been disconnected. I can't control you anymore. Mom finally sighed. I told you not to marry far away, but you didn't listen. Now you're talking about getting a divorce. I won't care about your affairs anymore from now on. Just as I dried my tears, Louis came, as if nothing had happened. He said gently, "Is the baby being good?" He sat beside me and fed me porridge spoon by spoon. "Is it still hot?" Now, when I looked at Louis's face, I just felt disgusted. If he could firmly choose Maggie, I might respect him a bit more. But now, why is he holding on to me and even asking my parents to put pressure on me? Louis, I took out my phone. Let's take a family photo of the three of us. Seeing that I seemed to be relenting, Louis immediately stood up. Okay, I'll hold the baby. Don't tire yourself out. Looking at myself in the photo, I was no longer swollen, and my face finally looked pretty again. I added a caption, "Peaceful years," and directly posted it. I happily replied to every congratulatory comment. Finally, 10 minutes later, I scrolled to Maggie's WeChat moments. Will there be someone in this world who loves me? Will my Prince Charming appear tonight? The location was the noisiest bar in the city. I heard that there were men waiting outside the bar to pick up drunk girls. I pretended not to see it. I slowly played with the baby for a while. But Louis couldn't sit still. He was like a knight eager to rescue the princess. Looking anxious. After a long 5 minutes, "Wife, there's suddenly an urgent matter at the company." He looked apologetic. "I'll come back to accompany you soon." I responded obediently. "Then be careful." There were only 3 days left until the end of my confinement period. I gently got up, put on long socks and pants, and also wore an ugly confinement hat. I entrusted the baby to the confinement center and Nanny Zhang, and went out fully armed. Sitting in the taxi, I watched Louis, who was worried and anxious about Maggie. I suddenly remembered what was often said online. My husband has a girlfriend. In the past, just seeing these words made me feel sad. I couldn't accept that my husband would pour the love he had for me onto another woman. I looked down to check the memory of the camera and smiled self-deprecatingly. On the way to catch them in the act, I was very calm. I was only worried about whether the camera could take clear pictures. "Boss. I don't want to call you boss. Can I call you Louis? Aren't you tired of your wife? Why are you still so intimate with her? I thought you liked me." Maggie was dressed revealingly and was carried out of the bar by Louis. She affectionately pinched Louis's face. "Will you marry me?" Louis frowned. "Don't talk nonsense." The last time she mentioned divorce, I was completely devastated. I can't lose her. Maggie suddenly started shouting. "I don't believe it. Louis, look into my eyes. Put your hand on your conscience, and ask yourself if there's a place for me in your heart. Do you dare to say that you've never had feelings for me?" The moment Louis looked directly at Maggie, Maggie kissed him directly. She took Lewis's hand and placed it on her chest, murmuring, "Touch me. Touch my heart. It's all filled with you." I couldn't help but sigh at Maggie's way of manipulating men. I watched the two of them passionately kissing, and I felt nothing inside. I followed them and entered the hotel, listening to the gasps of passion coming from inside. I sat outside the door for 10 minutes. I took a deep breath, knocked on the door with my left hand, and raised my phone with my right hand. "Who is it?" Maggie shouted impatiently. I heard the footsteps getting closer and closer. The moment the door opened, I saw them both naked, and Maggie was covered in red marks. Lewis stood naked behind her, pointing at me in horror. Why are you here?" I shook the phone in my hand. Photos might not be evidence, but a video is enough. I ignored the provocative Maggie. "Lewis, can we get a divorce now? Leave the house with nothing." The moment Lewis nodded heavily, I finally let go of everything. I closed the door for them and said softly, "Thank you." On September 2nd, I ended my confinement period early. I didn't want to wait for another day. I carried the baby and went to the Civil Affairs Bureau. Lewis and I sat side by side, but we were about to go our separate ways. The staff all looked at me with sympathetic eyes. "Are both parties voluntarily getting a divorce?" "Yes," I said firmly. The moment the divorce application was submitted, I still couldn't help but shed tears. It wasn't because I regretted this marriage, but because I regretted these best years of my youth. I looked at the man beside me, who was handsome and successful in his career, but he could no longer overlap with that young man in white in my memory. "Naomi," Lewis called out to me after we left the Civil Affairs Bureau. "There's still a month left. I'll make you change your mind." I was muddle-headed and blinded by the dullness of marriage. Only after losing you did I realize how important you are to me. I waved my hand and walked away briskly. In the past, I was fearless because I loved him, and what you can't have is always stirring. I left the small house we had when we first started our business to Lewis. I moved back to the large flat with the baby. Lewis seemed to have gone crazy. Every day, he did nothing but stay outside my house. "Now I understand your hardships. There's always endless housework every day." As soon as I saw it was him, I slammed the door shut with a bang. "Get lost." He seemed to have returned to the Lewis from our youth, shamelessly staying outside my house, until my parents arrived here in a hurry. My dad slapped Lewis twice, telling him not to pester me. I was stunned. I thought. I hugged my mom. There were tears in my mom's eyes. "Silly child. What did you think? I'm your mom, not his mom. If you're not happy, do you think I'd force you to death? Your dad and I have settled things in our hometown and came to take care of our precious grandson." Lewis knelt on the ground. "Dad, hit me. As long as it can make you feel better. You can hit me however you want." He grabbed my dad's trouser leg, afraid of being turned away again. "Lewis." The appearance of the familiar face really gave me a shock. Maggie had disheveled hair and stared at me fiercely. "Your cooling off period is about to end, and you'll get the divorce certificate soon. Why are you still pestering Lewis?" I laughed out of anger and pointed at Lewis, who was kneeling on the ground. "Am I pestering him?" Lewis was just about to scold Maggie. "I'm pregnant," Maggie said to Lewis. Lewis's first reaction was to look at me in a panic. "Listen to me, Naomi." I didn't feel the slightest bit of sadness. Instead, I felt a sense of relief. I said to Lewis seriously, "Lewis, you've already let me down. Do you want to let her down too?" My parents and I went inside. Lewis knelt for a long time and finally called my name outside the door. "Naomi." "I'm sorry." My hand that was changing the diaper paused. I remembered the year when I was 20. He stood downstairs of the dormitory and confessed to me. He said, "Naomi, I love you. I'm 27 years old this year." He said, "Naomi, I'm sorry. I sold my shares in the company at a high price to Lewis's sworn enemy." With my parents around, I could focus on my own career with peace of mind. Marika was becoming more and more obedient and learning more and more skills. I hadn't heard any news about Lewis for a long time. It was only when I attended a meeting that I heard that Lewis was no longer the high-spirited young man he used to be. Without the filter of the past, the two of them had turned their lives into a mess. Molly had no one to discipline her and was willful and reckless. She provoked a group of people from the underworld, who would rummage through Lewis's house from time to time. Lewis was tied down by his family and didn't have the energy to start a business again. He had all the skills but couldn't put them into practice anymore. A year later, I became a rising star in the broadcasting industry. I established my own program, The main audience of my program were women in marriage. They were talkative, chattered on and on, received no responses, and turned into shrews, then into madmen, and finally into spiritless mutes in the course of being worn down. I knew very well how important the desire to talk and share was to a woman. Recently, Mariko could also let go and walk a few steps on his own. My parents had more laughter and joy in their daily life of taking care of Mariko. Looking at my bright self in the mirror, I was glad that it wasn't too late for everything. When the news of Louis and Maggie's divorce came, I was doing a voice test. Molly didn't have a single peaceful day and actually caused someone's death. Her sister Maggie howled every day, asking Louis to find a solution. Louis couldn't bear the burden, and at the age of 30, he actually grew a head of white hair. Maggie felt sorry for her sister and actually tried to play the same old trick, trying to get close to a boss in his 50s. As a result, she was severely beaten by the boss's wife and was even hung all over the community with posters and banners. She became a mistress that everyone hated. Louis ran away. After the divorce, no one ever saw him again. I smiled after hearing this and threw myself into my work. Maybe he would go to another place and make a comeback. Maybe he would become a homeless man picking up trash. What does it have to do with me? The road ahead is long and eventful. There's always something to look forward to. The end.